What's going on, everybody? It's Joel here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Puma Fuse 2. Alright, so the original Puma Fuse came out in very early 2021, and we're just now finally getting the Fuse 2. These actually aren't even out yet. They drop in a couple of weeks on 10/28/2022. But I actually picked them up at the CrossFit Games in the first week of August. So I've been using these shoes for about 3 months now, and I think I have a good enough amount to say about them. And to be honest with you, I did not like these shoes right away, but the more that I use them, the more I can appreciate them. And they're surprisingly better than I had initially thought they were. So like I said, I picked these up at the CrossFit Games, but I got the WIT Special Edition models, which do have some build quality differences between the normal ones and the special editions. But the general experience wearing the two shoes is kind of the same thing. So let's talk about the construction of the shoes, and I'll highlight really the only difference between them, which is the toe box. The toe box has two different materials. The normal one has just more of a normal mesh, and then the WIT models has a more like ripstop kind of upper, and that is very similar to the first miles that came out last year. And I will say that even though the shoes remain very, very flexible, the WITs are a little bit less breathable than the normal model is because of the more closed off mesh material. That's really it. They're still extremely flexible in the toe box. The difference between last year's model and this year's model as far as the upper goes in like build quality is that they are now using a no-sew upper. So everything on the upper of the twos is thermally welded, and you can kind of see where the seams are. But it gives the shoe a little bit more of a clean look. There's no real hot spots or anything. I never really noticed hot spots on last year's. Actually, I did. On where the Puma logo was, there was a little bit of that pressing into the side of my foot. I didn't notice that with these shoes, but they did also change the last. So now it is a little bit more wide compared to last year's, but it's still not a wide shoe. Anyways, let's go back to the upper of the shoe. So you do have that mesh material in the front part of the normal ones. You do have the ripstop on the WIT models. You have some overlays over the toe bumper to give the shoe a little bit more structure around the eye stays. And then the Puma logo is another overlay on the lateral side of the shoe. Coming around to the quarter, there's a mesh around it. It's very breathable, but I will say that the ankle collar is very, very loose on this shoe, and it almost feels like there's like no ankle support. The last year's model did have a higher cut to it, and I didn't really notice that until I put the two different shoes on side by side, but that is also a difference between the shoes. The WIT models have a little overlay at the back here, and the normal ones just have mesh. There's a pull tab at the heel, and the WIT ones have a cool golden heel clip, and the heel clip here is supposed to slide up the wall when you're doing handstand push-ups, and then it gives you a slight bit of structure at the heel of the shoe. You do get this random foam piece here, but it's not part of like the midsole or anything. It's mainly to just secure the heel and give it a little bit more stability, because the shoe, like last year's, does have a drop-in midsole, very similar to how Nike's used to do their older Metcons. In contrast to Nike's drop-in midsole, Puma's midsole is very soft. And I will say one weird thing between all of my shoes is that even though the drop-in midsole has the same code and serial number as it did last year, so it's the same exact one, the widths are considerably more soft than any of the other ones. Like I said, it doesn't really change the overall experience between all the shoes, but I will just comment that there's a weird difference there. The drop on these shoes should still be 4 millimeters, even though I couldn't find anything about it online. Because the drop in midsole is the same, the drop should still be 4 millimeters. And then coming around to the outsole of the shoe, we have Puma's Puma Grip outsole, which has a pretty good amount of traction on it. And that's one thing that I really liked about the shoe from last year, and then obviously this year. It's pretty much the same exact outsole. And they do the forefoot in a way, it's like the fuse flex thing that they got going on here. And what that allows the shoe to do is it basically expands and contracts. Contracts when you're not putting pressure down, but expands and gives you a little bit more grip with the ground when you're doing, your lifting movements or your jumping movements, explosive movements. They did change the way that the little lateral medial sidewall comes up, and that it does give you very, very good traction up the rope. And if I can say that there was anything amazing about these shoes, it's that they are very, very good for rope climbing, and I'll touch a little bit more on that later. Now, one thing that hasn't changed for the better was the weight of the shoes. I got the WIT models in at 13.5 ounces, and I got the normal ones in at 13.3 ounces, which to me is kind of a heavy training shoe. It's not light by any means. There's definitely heavier shoes out there, but I still think it kind of feels weird because the shoe's so flexible, but they're still fairly heavy. Okay, so when you go to size your Puma Fuse, I'm gonna say most people can go with their normal training shoe size nowadays. Like I said, they did change the last on the shoe so it fits more true to size, but it is not a wide shoe. If you have wide feet, you're still gonna have to size up. For me, I think it fits just fine. The WIT ones do have a slight bit more width than the normal ones, but it's very, very slight. And it could really just come down to me just having worn the WIT ones more than the normal models. But otherwise, I think that most people should be okay with their just standard true to size fit. And if you did have a wide foot, I'd probably recommend that you just stay away from these shoes in general. There's no real heel slip with these shoes, but like I mentioned earlier, the ankle support is almost non-existent in these shoes. And one thing that kind of kills it for me is that because the shoes are so flexible, there's not a whole lot of structure. It doesn't really feel like the shoe ever wants to hold your foot in place inside of the shoe. It can be a good thing for some movements, but overall, I think just the amount of flexibility and just how much your foot is able to slide around the shoe is generally not so great in this. Which leads me to things like running and plyometric movements. Running is a weird one. Because the shoes are flexible, they have a pretty soft midsole, running is generally comfortable, but at the same time, they're kind of heavy, and that's why I don't really like these shoes to run in. I mean, if you don't mind a little bit more weight on your foot, or you have more active feet. I've got pretty lazy feet when I run, so running in these is not that pleasant because of the weight of them. But they are flexible and they are cushioned, and I think that they are generally pretty comfortable. You will also notice that weight when you're doing a lot of burpees, jumping over the bar, having to pick up your feet, doing box jumps and whatnot. Generally, the shoes are pretty comfortable and pretty responsive, but the weight, to me, it's something that I notice pretty immediately when I start doing any kind of my jumping movements. But like I said before, they are flexible and they are comfortable. As I mentioned earlier, the drop-in midsole on the Fuse is a little bit on the softer side, but it generally does okay for most lifts. I was actually surprised at how much I could lift in these shoes without really being bugged at how soft the drop-in midsole was. I was squatting in my 80%, deadlifting around the same, doing my Olympic weightlifting movements, and like the original Puma Fuse, I did notice that the shoe was kind of unstable on certain catches, certain overhead movements, certain squatting movements, like the more dynamic stuff, the Olympic weightlifting movements and your barbell cycling. If it came down to just like your slower movements, just squat, deadlift, that wasn't necessarily a problem. But really, the main issue is not the drop-in midsole and how soft it is. It's that the upper lacks structure and it lets your foot slide around side to side. Torsionally, these shoes have a lot of flex. It's very easy. Like I can pretty much twist the whole shoe like that. There's nothing stopping your foot. I actually almost twisted my ankle just getting off the GHD because I took a step onto like the GHD rail and then the shoe like twisted on me. My foot went sideways and I thought that was a little bit annoying. But where that lack of structure actually helps the Puma Fuse out is, like I said earlier, for rope climbing. A lot of shoes have very good grip going up the rope, but where I see a lot of shoes fail is coming down the rope, and that shoes will usually want to pull off your foot or they'll turn sideways on you, and that just wasn't the case with the Fuse because of just how the shoe will flex and everything. It stays on your foot, you're able to slide down the rope without the shoe wanting to fall off, and I just thought that generally like just doing a bunch of rope climbs in the shoe was one of the best experiences that I've had using these. The area where the Fuse are probably the best is in the value department. So the normal models will retail for $100 when they come out. I think the WIT models are gonna be $110, not that much more than just the standard models. And that is a little bit of a price increase from last year's $90, but it's still the most like affordable training shoe out there. Putting these shoes in at $100 is actually pretty aggressive by Puma, but I don't know if that's gonna be enough to attract your Metcon buyers or your Reebok buyers or your Noble buyers that are pretty accustomed to spending $130 on a pair of shoes. But if you're new to training and you see that sticker shock $130, I think then you'll get a lot of some of the newcomers that are in the training scene buying the Puma Fuse, which I think for $100, it's a pretty good shoe. It's obviously not the best training shoe out there, but it does everything that you need it to do. You can lift in it. It's obviously not the greatest lifting shoe, but it's definitely usable. It's pretty okay for running. I mean, if you don't mind the weight, it's pretty flexible and comfortable. For plyometric movements, kind of the same idea as like running. And overall, it does everything good, but just not like stellar or amazing. I wouldn't put it at the top of my training shoe list, but I do think that it's a lot better of a shoe than I had initially thought it was gonna be. Luckily, I didn't do this review within like the first 2 weeks of having it because it would have sounded a whole lot different. But I do actually think the Puma Fuse is not a bad training shoe. And if you like the way that it looked, you wanted something different, I'd highly recommend it. For $100, it would not hurt to try. If you guys have any questions about the Puma Fuse 2, feel free to leave them in the comment section. And as always guys, please hit that like button, subscribe, and thanks for watching.